So hi everyone, my name is Thengvall. I'm here today to talk to you about developer relations. I'm guessing many of you in the room are familiar with the term at least, yes? Nods, hands, something? Okay, cool. So I'm going to approach it from a slightly different angle today, as you might be able to tell by the title slide behind me. I'm going to be explaining the business value of developer relations by using the fruit that's famous throughout San Francisco, the avocado. So, why avocados, you might ask? Besides the fact that they're amazingly delicious, and I can say that because I liked them before they were popular, developer relations has become known as the good kind of fat over the last few years in the tech industry. And this was an analogy that picked up steam about 3 years ago when I was working with the developer relations team over at SparkPost, which is an email API company based here in the Bay. One of our project managers had a hard time saying developer advocacy, and it often came out as developer avocado when she got to talking quickly. And given how much my coworker, Adrian Howard, loved avocados, he took on the mantle of developer avocado without much prompting at all. We added to the team, and we became known as the developer avocado team. And we decided to own this title not only internally, but externally as well. And pretty soon, an analogy was born out of it. So who am I pre-avocado? I'm obviously not a product manager. I'm not involved in product teams typically. I actually have a journalism background, but as I was entering the workforce was right around the time when all of the newspapers decided to start laying off their writing staff. So I have really great timing. But I pivoted, as most tech companies learn to do, and I wound up using my feature writing and storytelling abilities to help companies build communities. So figuring out where that fits, figuring out where the developer audience fits within marketing, where it fits within product, how we work with them, because it's a somewhat unique group as far as just the relative audiences go in the tech realm, right? They're a little bit harder to approach, a little bit harder to know how to deal with, a little bit harder to know how to interact with. So I've worked with various developer communities for over the last 10 years now, with companies like O'Reilly Media, Chef Software, and like I said, lately at SparkPost as well. And I love figuring out what makes each of them tick, what sets them apart, what problems they're facing, and what solutions work for their particular developer audience. These days, I'm running my own company, Persea Consulting. Yes, those are avocados in my company logo. Persea is the scientific genus for avocado. And the goal of Persea Consulting is to provide resources and education for folks who are doing developer relations on a day-to-day basis, as well as stakeholders in the companies who don't really understand what that means and how to approach it. These are a bunch of resources that I maintain or manage as a part of that. The most relevant one for today is on the far left, the book up there, Business Value of Developer Relations. I just finished that. I got my hands on my first print copies last week. So it's a little surreal still. But I do have a few copies to give away to folks who are interested at the end of the talk. But all this to say, I do a lot and have a lot of side projects, and I'm very involved in a lot of things that are mostly all based around driving the developer relations industry forward and helping people like you and other companies really truly understand the business value that's behind this industry. So that's where all of this developer avocado thing started. And it's really only grown from there. But what does it mean for you today? So in short, it means that I really understand the confusion around developer relations, what it is, how it applies to you, what it means. And the fact that also most companies acknowledge that it's a good thing to have, but when they're confronted with the why they should have it, they don't really know what to say other than, we are told to by our VC, or everyone else is doing it, or we have a developer audience, so that's the thing that you do, right? And I'll be the first to tell you, DevRel is not an easy one-size-fits-all, silver bullet kind of a solution. But because it doesn't fit within your business value metrics that you're used to, it takes a little more digging into. It takes a little more understanding. But if you approach it with patience and ask the right questions, it can be a true amount of value that's contributed back to your business. So there's 4 principles that I'm going to be presenting today that not only explain why developer relations is like avocados, but it'll also show you that by applying these principles, DevRel can be a valuable and healthy part of your business. So before we jump into those principles, let's start with 2 important definitions so we're kind of all on the same page. So first off, community. Community is a group of people who not only share common principles, but also develop and share practices that help individuals in the group thrive. And how you define who falls into the realm of your community at your particular company will depend on your intentions. And we'll get to that in a minute, but depending on where you want to go with it, what you want to do, how you want to handle it, will all drive that definition for you. But for me, in general, community includes your current customers, it includes potential customers, any of your prospects. It also includes anyone who could in the future be interested in your product, which is why developer relations is such a broad topic, because hypothetically, any developer, if they're a front-end developer and you have a front-end product, if you have a back-end product and they're a back-end developer, all of those things could someday be interested in your product, even if your product doesn't work for their particular company that they're at right now. And we'll talk about that more in a bit. So how does this fit into developer relations? First of all, developer relations isn't just another name for developer advocates. It's the umbrella term for community building both online and offline. So it includes developer advocates, it includes developer event management, it includes developer social media, it includes building an online community of your customers, all of those types of things. It can even go so far as to include things like documentation and training, like companies Twilio does. But at its foundation, the purpose of developer relations, or DevRel, is to build relationships with the developer community. So we have this mantra: to the community, I represent the company. To the company, I represent the community. I must have both of their interests in mind at all times. And this is slightly different than how most of us approach the business, right? You normally have, well, the business is in the forefront of your mind at all times. And it's not to say that DevRel professionals don't have the business interests in mind. After all, that pays their bills. But they also understand that if the community is happy and if the community is successful as a result of using the product, then the business is far more likely to succeed as well. But in order for the DevRel team to succeed, they must be fully supported by the company. So they need to have a clear set of business goals. They need to have a clear set of expectations. They need to know that their work is seen as valuable throughout the company and is therefore not only allowed, but is actively encouraged by the stakeholders. Which brings us back to why I'm here today, helping you understand the value of developer relations via the analogy of avocados. So here's our first principle, which you might have guessed from the title slide. DevRel is the good kind of fat. And avocados are the good kind of fat, right? We've heard that a lot. This relates to DevRel because it tends to be considered the expensive or fatty department in the business, which makes sense given that a lot of times sponsorships for conferences or the swag budget or helping out with open source projects that aren't related necessarily to the core software that you're producing, but used at the right times, in the right ways, with the right combinations of items, developer relations can have amazingly healthy benefits for your company as well as for your community. So what are some of those right times, right ways, right combinations of items? Things like talking to developers about product feedback, like Jana was just talking about. Things like having one-on-one conversations with top community members and then being the liaison between those community members and your product and engineering teams, and creating open source tooling and documentation around your product as well that make your developers' lives easier. So I call these connections made while doing this liaison work warm handoffs. And these handoffs aren't limited to sales. They can be to a variety of groups. It could be to product, where it could be, this company could be a really great company for us to partner with in the future with various projects. It could be a great symbiotic relationship for them to list us on their website, us to list them on our website. It could be to marketing, a customer who's interested in being featured in a case study, or a community member who's interested in writing a blog post. To product, someone who's willing to give extensive feedback, to engineering, someone who stumbled on a particularly hard to figure out bug, and of course, sales. And depending on the person, depending on the company that they work for and the role that they have, you might not be passing them off. It might be their manager. Or it might be passing them off to a technical side of the sales team so they can have a conversation about where things are going. But these warm handoffs are incredibly important to keep track of for a number of reasons. The most obvious one and the most relevant one today is that it's a definitive way to attribute value back to the activities that the developer relations team is doing on a day-to-day basis. Additionally, in aggregate, it's a valuable way for them to see which activities are particularly valuable and which ones contribute the most value back to the company. Twilio's developer evangelism team puts it this way. Our job is to inspire and equip developers to build the next generation of amazing applications. This means understanding what they're trying to do, pointing them to tools and training, and generally helping them be successful. Is this an inexpensive endeavor? No, but it is worthwhile. And when Twilio was first founded, they were told they didn't stand a chance with a developer-focused strategy. They were told that's not worth your time. They were told you need a more enterprise strategy. They were told that's not going to succeed if you keep saying, no, we have a developer focus, and not a developer enterprise focus, but just a developer focus in general. But they went on to land $1 million seed round. Their first full-time employee that they hired, Danielle Morel, built out what is now acknowledged as the startup world's most effective developer marketing program. And now they've got customers like Dell, Twitter, Lyft, Salesforce, Hulu, Twitch, Intuit. The list goes on, but they continue to cater to developers and build out what's now known as one of the top developer relations teams in the entire industry. And they've invested a significant amount of money into something that they were told would never make them successful because they understood the true value of developer relations. If you can prove to developers unequivocally that you not only want, but will listen to and implement their feedback, you will gain their loyalty. Principle number 2, avocados take on the flavor of things around them. So there was a time in my life that I'm ashamed to say I didn't understand the appeal of avocados. They're kind of somewhat mushy, they're a little bit bland, they're kind of odd looking. And one day my aunt introduced me to this super simple lunch that we were having out at the beach that's just a white cheddar rice cake, and you put some avocado on top, and you put Havarti cheese on top of there. And I later experimented and figured out if you add fried egg on top of that, it makes a delicious breakfast as well. And it's this idea that it pulls out the flavors that are surrounding it, right? So the nuttiness of the Havarti, or the really yummy but kind of fake taste of the white cheddar rice cake. And now that I've made all of us hungry, what's my point? So that didn't sound good, but I hope they're okay. Anyways, in the same way as avocados kind of pull out the flavors of the things around it, developer relations teams tend to take on the flavor of the product that they're working with. They can be fluid in goals. They can be fluid in what department that they're in, which is a whole other talk for a whole other day, and what the group looks like, depending on the needs and goals of the company. So what I'm saying here is there's no one-size-fits-all solution. What's worked amazingly well for Twilio and GitHub and other companies may or may not work well for you. Case in point, this meme, if you're not familiar with it, says we check what Twilio did, we copy out on a lower budget, we buy beers for developers, and then Doug in marketing asks what our team is for. CEO notices, team is disbanded. Right? So there's this common theme of people go, oh, well, it worked for that company, and they're doing great things, and let's just copy-paste exactly what they did. And it's funny, but it's also, unfortunately, kind of true. Like, a lot of companies do this, but when you're looking at someone else's strategy for developer relations, you're looking at what they've developed for their specific audience and what they've honed over the years that they know works for them. And you can't just copy-paste that. You have to take the time to figure out what works for you, which means you need to ask the right questions. And the first question is, why? Why do you actually want a community? I didn't actually ask, do you have a community, which might be interesting for some of you, but whether or not you've spent the time to build up that community, you have one. You've got your customers, you've got people using you. It's just a matter of whether or not you're going to take the time to invest in it and actually be actively involved in fostering that community. So if you're familiar with Simon Sinek, have anybody? Yes? Cool. So this question won't be news to you then. For those of you who aren't familiar, it's this idea that you have to ask why you're doing something before you can set goals, before you can figure out how to implement those goals. Because our why drives how we respond to people. It drives what we actually say. It drives the structure of who handles it and who's in charge of it, who's responsible for those different aspects. It drives how we respond to community members, where we send people for more resources, all of those types of things. So why do we want a community? Your answer to this doesn't have to be quantitative metrics. It could be abstract. But you need to make sure that it aligns with the company's goals, And you also need to make sure that it explains the purpose behind all of your your community-related endeavors at your company. And this becomes your North Star of why you're doing what you're doing. So every goal that you write out in the future, you make sure it points back to this. Any initiative that you set up, make sure it points back to your why. Because if it doesn't, you either need to reevaluate your why, or you shouldn't be doing that aspect of the community building. The other thing to remember is you want to make sure that your why is driven by a reason, not driven by a result. So for example, to make a profit is a result of what you're doing. It's a result of growing relationships. It's a result of nurturing leads. It's a result of having a great product, not a reason to do it initially. So your reason for establishing a community might be generating engagement. It might be making a better product. It might be customer retention. The result of that reason might be warm handoffs, like we mentioned earlier. Opportunities to further product feedback, pass along possible recruits, facilitate sales opportunities, or more. But your why needs to be the reason, your motivating factor for doing what you're doing. Next question. What do you hope to accomplish with this community? And this question helps you determine whether you're trying to create a community of customers or simply define your specific market. You might be looking for a core group of customers to get periodic feedback or set up people to do beta testing on your product. Maybe you want to follow up on trends that you're seeing throughout the industry and verify that those things are actually happening. But the answers to this question can help you determine not only how to best serve your community, but also which department is the best fit for your DevRel team. So are they mostly writing content, creating resources? Maybe product is a good place. Are they speaking at events? Are they educating people about why it's important that this topic and this product at this time is important? Maybe marketing. If they're working on sample apps and developer experience, maybe engineering is a good fit. So as you can see, depending on what the goals of the team are, which are determined by the why and the what do you hope to accomplish, you figure out the placement of the team. Like I said, that's a whole other talk. If you're interested in talking about that, I'm happy to afterwards. But the key here is figuring out not only what will allow your team to succeed, but also what makes the most sense for the community. Principle number 3, avocados go well with many different cuisines. And this matches up closely with the last point, right? But you've got avocados in Mexican dishes, you've got them in breakfast dishes, you've got them in BLTs, but you can find them in all different sorts of cuisines today. And this, like I said, matches up nicely with the last point about it takes on the flavor and complements the flavors of other things, but also it's not going to look or feel the same at every company. So not only can DevRel goals and the department that they report to be different in each company, but the tactics that they're using to build that community changes depending on the circumstances and the type of the product. There's really a set way to engage with the community. It's going to depend on what your needs are at that time, and you experiment and pull those variety of levers and then observe the outcomes and continue. This is something that the community team at Keen knows well. And this is their team mission. It says, we use our superpowers to help Kineo grow into a sustainable business by supporting other teams within the organization, our internal community, in accomplishing their missions, and also helping our customers, partners, investors, advisors, fans, friends and family, etc., our extended community, be everything that they dream to be. And it makes it clear that they want to do whatever they can to serve both of those communities, internal and external, which goes back to the point that I made earlier about to the community, you represent the company, to the company, you represent the community, right? You have both of those interests in mind at all time. And again, more often than not, this success is achieved through connections. So if you're looking for one silver bullet, one simple principle, it's answering this. What is it that only DevRel can do? And I would posit that the one thing that DevRel really, really excels at doing, we can write, we can speak, we can do product, we can code sometimes, depending on who you are within the organization, but we excel at making connections. My friend Amy Hermes calls this being a technical cruise director. So we're the people that kind of stand at the back of the room and go, okay, that person's standing by themselves. I know they really like this programming language. And her over there, she really likes that too. Let me go introduce them. Let me talk to both of them about the new feature that we just put out. Let me see if I can solve both of their pain points. And stepping back and letting them take the conversation from there and then following up with them afterward, making that warm handoff community member to community member, and then following up with them to say, hey, how did that conversation go? Is there any feedback that I can give to my team? Is there anything else that I can help you with going forward? And in doing so, we become the spoke of the wheel. Not an offshoot, but the center, right? Absolutely essential to keep that wheel of progress turning, but also the connection point between all of the departments, the internal community as well as the external community members, and between those two segments as well. All right, last principle here. Avocados take a long time to ripen, which I know, at least for me, is really annoying. But it's an even longer process if you take into account that it takes 5 years for an avocado tree to be fruitful. Once the fruit's ripe, it's not only delicious, but it yields a good profit for the farmers. So if you haven't guessed it already, or if you didn't hear me say it earlier, DevRel is not a quick fix, right? It's a long-term goal. It's a long-tail thing that you're going to be focused on. But with a good upfront investment and careful nurturing, that final harvest can be really rewarding. So you might be asking, if it's a long-tail game, that's fine, but what do we track? Logical thing to go to is work output. That's what's tracked by a lot of other departments, right? How does your work input impact the bottom line? But please, 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 if you don't hear me say anything else today, please don't track work output for your DevRel team. And you might ask why. But part of the problem with that is if one of the things that they're going out and doing is speaking at conferences, for example, like this one, they can check off the box. You know, today, after this is done, I can check the box saying, yes, I spoke at a conference, I accomplished that goal. That doesn't take into account any of the previous work that I put into this. It doesn't take into account the research that I had to do to make sure that I was submitting to the right conferences, or then filling out all of the CFPs to make sure that I have a chance at getting approved at one, and then getting accepted, and then having to write the talk and make sure that it fits the audience that I'm speaking to, and then practice the talk, and then book the travel if it's out of town, and then travel, and then give the talk, and then, okay, today I can check that off, right? But that's only one thing according to my normal work output. And if you're lucky, and only if you're lucky, once you're done with the talk, then no one asks you what impact you had on the bottom line for the business. But typically, people start to see you as the person or the team who spends a lot of money flying around the world to see exotic locations like Pittsburgh and Raleigh and Pasadena, California. But you're partying with the community and you're not actually accomplishing anything, right? You spoke at that conference and that was one afternoon, but what do you do the rest of the quarter? So DevRel needs business alignment to have a ramp-up time, to be able to succeed on these longer commitment deadlines, which building a community frequently requires. So what is the better metric? And at this point, you can probably say it with me. Tracking connections or warm handoffs, right? Because here's the deal. When your DevRel team is out at those speaking engagements, when they're out at the meetups, when they're online on the forums, when they're wasting time on Twitter, quote unquote, they're building connections. They're meeting customers. They're meeting potential customers. They're meeting competition. They're meeting influencers. It's what they do, and it's what they're good at. They're good at making connections and being those technical cruise directors that I mentioned earlier. And if you encourage them then to pass those connections that they've made back into the company, making the appropriate connections to sales, product, marketing, all of those different departments, and if they know that they can trust the people that they're making the handoffs to treat those people appropriately and to not take advantage of those relationships, then you're enabling them to do what they're best at, what only they can do, going back to that question we said earlier, and turning that into a metric that directly proves just how valuable they are and the impact that they can have on your company. But you also allow them to continue serving the community in the best way possible. When these opportunities do ripen down the road, because they will, so when the developer who's currently at the tiny startup that never has a use case for your product suddenly moves to the biggest enterprise that you've been trying to get on your customer list for years, that community member is going to remember, hey, I know this company, I trust that company because of these people that I've met and because of these conversations that I've had, and they will then become the internal advocate at that company to get them signed up as your newest customer. But if you put a metric of sales or recruiting or any ROI goal that needs to prove an immediate return, they're going to fail because they aren't able to keep up with those metrics because they aren't able to do what you've hired them to do, which is represent the community to the company and the company to the community. Because they'll be too focused on those other goals to be able to pay attention to that, or they'll be too worried about losing their job because of the people coming to them going, what is it you actually do here and what is the value that you provide? But by focusing on the warm handoffs, you set the DevRel team and your community up for success. So, quick recap. We've covered 4 principles today. Avocados are the good kind of fat. They take on the flavor of things around them. They go well with many different cuisines. And they take a long time to ripen. And hopefully, these 4 principles, while they're a little bit quirky, will help you remember the true value that developer relations can bring to any developer-focused product and business. Because I believe strongly, as I said at the beginning, that used in the right ways, at the right times, and the right combination of items, that DevRel can bring about the type of value that your company needs, that your product needs, and that your community needs, and can ultimately transform your entire method of doing business. Why? Because, bonus principle, avocados are good for your heart. The more that you look into the research and data around avocados, the more that you realize just how good they are for you. And likewise, with more research and data around developer relations, you realize it's not only good for your business, but in many cases essential to maintaining a healthy product. So, no one can deny that a happy community and a healthy product are good for the heart of every company, just like avocados. And that's it.